I say these words in the name of the God who loves us all. Amen. Please. Evangelism. Evangelism. What do you think of when I say that word? What do you think of when I say the word evangelism? I think for some of us, evangelism is a scary word. You heard me say it and you sat up straight in your pew. You kind of got a little bit of a shock and you thought, I thought we were in the Episcopal Church. I didn't know we'd be hearing about evangelism this morning. And then some of you might have heard it and thought, is he allowed to say that? Isn't that a dirty word in the Episcopal Church? A word we are better off just keeping outside the doors of the church. Let that be for other groups. What do you think of when you hear the word evangelism? For a lot of us, we might think of street preachers. You know those really nice people that you see on the street corners with those horrible signs and those bullhorns with a list of all the people who are really bad and all the people who are not getting into heaven. Bad news, most of us, according to them. Sometimes that's what we think of. We think of those people on the street corners. We think the door-to-door salespeople who wake you up early on a Saturday morning wanting to talk about faith and invite you to join their interpretation of faith. When we think of evangelism, some of us, we might think of specific religious traditions. Traditions that we either were part of or we were in some way connected to, traditions that often focused on bringing in new people. These traditions say, we have the truth, we have the totality of the good news, and we want to give it to you. We have it, we want to give it to you. What do you think of? What do you think of when you hear the word evangelism? Maybe it's something of those, maybe it's something completely different. But the word actually comes from the Greek evangelion, which means good news. In some way, evangelism is supposed to be connected to the giving and the receiving of good news. Pete Rollins, an Irish philosopher and leader in the emerging church movement, he and his community, the Icon Collective, they came up with this thing called the Evangelism Project. It took a slightly different take on this idea. So he and a group of people, they would go to a different religious community. Sometimes that would be a different Christian denomination, but more often than not, it would be a completely different religious tradition. They would go to the mosque or the local synagogue or a Hindu temple, and they would ask 3 questions when they got there. They would be invited in, welcomed, and then they would ask 3 questions. They would ask, what do you do? And so they would observe the practices, the spiritual practices of that community. They would observe how they worship, how they exist together in community. And then they'd ask, what do you believe? And so they'd spend some time just discussing beliefs, the beliefs of their specific community, and how they came to understand those as core to their identity. And the third question they ask, Pete Rollins says that's where the real evangelism came in. They'd ask the question to this other religious community. They'd ask, how do you see us? How do you see us? How do you, people of a different religious tradition than us, how do you see us? Because so often what we know is unless you've got a really large mirror and a very flexible neck, you can't really see your back. You've got blind spots. We all do. As individuals and as communities, we don't always have the full picture of who we are, and so these other communities could share. They could share how they had seen, how they see this other community, how that community had either helped or sometimes had hurt them, had participated in systems that cause good and bad. And he said that in encountering the other, that was the only way that they could actually know the other. And in coming in that encounter to meet the other, it was the only way they would have the opportunity to encounter the Christ that was in them. And to have the opportunity to hear good news. Good news that might have been painful. Good news that might have been things they would have rather not heard about themselves, but nonetheless good news. Because it opened up the possibility of transformation. It opened up the possibility for relationship that previously wasn't there. The insight that Pete Rollins and this community have about evangelism is that the good news isn't something that we just have total ownership of and that we give to others. There's something about, at least according to Jesus, that we also must be those who receive the gospel. We must be people who receive good news. We are not the sole owners of good news in this world. That seems to be what Jesus is saying in today's gospel, that terribly long gospel reading we got this morning. It's really only a few verses because it's coming at the end of this long speech that Jesus has given. He's given this long speech to his disciples as he's preparing to send them out into the world. He's prepared them to go out into the world and proclaim the good news. And he's told them that, look, there are going to be some challenges. There are going to be some things that are worthy of fear, but don't be afraid. And it's interesting that as he concludes with those words we heard this morning. Words about mutual hospitality and mutual welcome. Now, why does Jesus, who's just given this very long speech and directions to his disciples about going and proclaiming, why does he end it? Why does he end it with mutual hospitality and mutual welcome? Well, he seems to think that that is an important part about our mission in the world, is to give hospitality and to receive it. Whoever welcomes you welcomes me, Jesus says. Whoever welcomes you welcomes me. What he's saying there is that to be a Christian means that, yes, we do offer hospitality, but we also receive it. We also receive hospitality. That to be a Christian means that, yes, sometimes we are the host, but we are also the guest. Every Sunday, we get a clear reminder of the fact that, in fact, we are always the guest. Every time we come to God's table, with hands outstretched, we are a reminder that we are a guest at God's table. We are a guest. Jesus is our host. Jesus is our host. It's a reminder also, these short verses, that to follow Jesus is actually quite simple. Not easy, but simple. Jesus says it's like giving water to someone who is in need. That's the invitation, that if you see someone who needs water, a cold cup of water, give it to them. And that is being faithful. Jesus doesn't need heroes. Jesus doesn't need saviors in this world. He's got that one covered. What Jesus needs is disciples. People who follow. People who reach out to one another, who are willing to give a cup of cold water to someone in need, and those who are willing to receive that cup of cold water when they need it. Mutual hospitality, mutual welcome, mutual vulnerability. It's like at our Maundy Thursday service where we have foot washing. It's just as important, if not more important, to allow your own feet to be washed to be a disciple, as it is to wash another's feet. What does evangelism look like to you? I think there are many things that we are called to. And maybe that might look like something that the Icon community and Pete Rollins did in Ireland. It might look like that, but it might not. As individuals, each one of us, and as Emmanuel, we are called to be the host and the guest. We are called to give and to receive. To be the one who welcomes and to be the one welcomed in. So often I think we'd much rather be the one who does the welcome because it keeps us safe. We get to be the one who offers. We get to be the one in the place of power. We get to be the one who has the good news. But Jesus calls us to also be the one who receives. It moves us from a place of stagnation, of being up on our pedestal, to one where we can actually grow, where we can actually be transformed. Instead of focusing on the conversion of others, we allow ourselves to be converted every day by the love of Christ and by the love of the other that we meet. Christ calls us. Christ calls us to go into the world and spread the good news, to share love and hope and life and resurrection. And Jesus also calls us to go into the world and receive those things, to receive the good news, to receive the love that God has for us. And you know what? That's good news. Amen.